Joining me today is Sahana Gupta, our Chief Diversity Officer and Title IX Coordinator, as well as Arthur McHugh Jr., our Director of Human Resources.
Hello.
So I'll start with a definition of IPV as per CDC, and also some statistics about gender. So, intimate partner violence is a serious, preventable public health problem that affects millions of Americans. The term IPV describes violence, sexual, physical, stalking, psychological harm by a current or former partner or spouse. This does not have to include a person that lives with you. This type of violence can occur among heterosexual and same-sex couples. And it doesn't require sexual intimacy either. So in terms of gender, about 1 in 4 women and nearly 1 in 10 men have experienced some form of IPV and some form of impact related to IPV. Strikingly, according to a 2015 transgender survey, more than half of transgender and non-binary individuals experience some form of IPV. So this is a look at the types of abuse that can happen under IPV: physical, emotional, verbal, sexual, financial, digital, and stalking. So digital is relatively new in the context of violence in romantic relationships. And it can include something like revenge porn, which is a crime now. Stalking can also include cyber stalking. And cyber stalking would fall under the umbrella of both digital abuse and stalking. With intimate partner violence, there are layers of abuse. At the center of them is the intention for power and control over the survivor. So the layers are because oftentimes multiple things, multiple factors are playing a role in how power and control is not only obtained, but also maintained. So an abuser may use the children in the sense that children are being threatened in some way that, of course, a partner would respond to emotionally and perhaps go along with whatever the abuser is saying. In terms of homophobia, transphobia, if a transgender partner lives in an area where there just isn't a lot of affirming support for transgender people, they may feel more isolated and more likely to feel dependent upon the abusive partner. Immigration status is a big one. If one's marriage status is tied to their ability to stay in the country, then that complicates matters as well. Ableism, partners who are abusive may take away the tools, the things that people with disabilities need in order to be as independent as possible. And the foundation of intimate partner violence is isolation. So there is a pattern that is recognizable, and the first thing that happens is there's tension building. So there might be difficulty in communication, the survivor feels fearful and is doing things like walking on eggshells so that the abuser does not respond in a way that is predictable. Then we have the incident, be it verbal, emotional, physical, threats, intimidation. We move to reconciliation, where the abuser offers an apology, gives excuses, and or blames the survivor. They may even deny that it happens. And during reconciliation, often the survivor of the abuse might join in with the abuser in blaming themselves. Just in terms of wanting to have control over a situation, self-blame actually can be a way for us to feel like we do. Perhaps if I hadn't made so much noise last night and awakened my partner, or perhaps if I didn't go out with my friends, like there are excuses that survivors of abuse may start to make in this situation. And then of course there is the calm, where things seem almost hopeful. And this is the part where survivors often feel like, well, maybe things can get better. Maybe this abuse is going to stop. And of course, it's human nature to want your romantic relationship to be healthy and loving, and for something that was horrible to go away, which explains to some degree how it's reinforced and the cycle continues. So the impacts on individuals who have been abused are multifaceted: physical and mental health issues, chronic disease, increased risk of substance use, PTSD, and, you know, like worst case scenario, data from US crime reports suggests that about 1 in 6 homicide victims are killed by an intimate partner. 1 in 6. So this is a way bigger problem than I think the general public gives attention to. In addition, the American Sociological Association reported that women who petition for restraining orders against abusers typically see decreased earnings. And we'll hear more about that later. So on affected loved ones, particularly children, exposure to violence in childhood increases the risk of injury, mental health conditions, and in the future, becoming both survivors and or perpetrators of intimate partner violence, substance abuse, lower educational attainment, and also difficulty with employment. So generally, abuse will not stop without the help of outside agencies that often include domestic violence liaisons at precincts, courts, child protective services, and DV shelters and the support staff that are there. So this is some safety planning for survivors. And it's not an exhaustive list, nor is it a personalized list. It's an example. So identifying a trusted person to speak with is important because, again, isolation reinforces the cycle of abuse. Identifying a crisis resource such as safehorizon.org, where you could both chat, text, or call 24/7. So these experts can definitely assist a person in creating a highly personalized safety plan and also connecting them with emergency services, including shelters if they need it. You can't always have your phone in an abusive situation. So it's possible that you may need to memorize some numbers in case of an emergency. Identifying a safe place in your neighborhood that you and or your children can go to if there is an incident is another way to protect oneself. And you'll hear more about this later, but consider using resources at your place of employment, your school, and or your child's school that could help you support your safety plan. This includes human resources, Title IX coordinators, and social workers at your child's school, for example. If you've moved beyond the point of being in the relationship and there is a restraining order, then these places can definitely also help you with keeping safe. You want to store cash and important documents in one place that you can easily access. Keep your car filled with gas, and also store the details of your plan in the safest place possible. In some cases, that might mean your head. So, intimate partner violence and COVID-19. Abusers are using COVID-19 as a scare tactic to further isolate and control survivors. Abusers are spending more time at home with their partners and being indoor more, while also dealing with socioeconomic stressors and other stressors related to COVID-19. In some cases, abusers' fears about COVID-19 have also been triggers for increased incidents of threats and placing blame on partners. So while this is definitely becoming a larger public health issue, there are things that survivors can do: speaking with trained professionals, taking steps to keep what you're doing discreet, such as clearing your browser or your call history if you've reached out to a hotline, engaging in ongoing self-care to the best of your ability. And in terms of self-care, that's definitely something that everyone has to be really intentional about. as intentional as drinking water, just because of the numbers of stressors in our lives right now. Without doing that, it's not going to happen. Without the consistency, it's not going to happen. And definitely more so for someone who is surviving intimate partner violence. Creating a safety plan with children can be really a difficult idea to think about, but it can be a really useful tool. You can create code words with your children. You can give them directions on what they should and shouldn't do. For example, you should let them know that they should not ever try to intervene or try to do something that could put them in more danger. You can direct them on who to call, be it a neighbor, be 911, whatever your specific plan is. The reason why I stress the importance of thinking about specific plans is because one of the most dangerous times in a survivor's life is when they make the decision to leave an abusive partner. That said, it doesn't mean you shouldn't leave. It means that you should create a safety plan that is super, super detailed, and often with the help of professionals who can help support you in implementing it. Exploring your options in terms of housing while we're in this period of limitation because of COVID-19 is also something that you can do as you work on a plan. So we may encounter people who are survivors of intimate partner violence. It's important that we listen to them without judgment and without pressuring the survivor, because as I've just detailed, IPV and all the implications of IPV are super complex. We want to understand that people make decisions in their own time and get information for ourselves from credible sources like the National Resource on Domestic Violence. Not for the survivor necessarily, but just for our own education. That said, we can definitely share resources with the person that we're trying to support. Just in terms of supporting someone and body language, please don't stand over the individual, because that can be seen as threatening, especially to someone who's been dealing with physical violence. Try to sit next to them or across from them. And if it's someone that you are considering giving a hug to or showing some other sign of affection to as a way of supporting them, please ask for consent. For the same reasons, because this person may be sensitive to having their body violated physically, sexually, etc. So here are some resources that survivors can use and people who would like to support survivors: the National Domestic Violence Hotline, RAIN, the National Sexual Assault Hotline, NRCDV, which I spoke about. Safe Horizon is an amazing resource. And the New York City Anti-Violence Project is also very helpful. And I will say that they have lots of experience working with the LGBTQIA+ population in particular. So now I'm going to pass it along to Sahana Gupta.
There are 3 and 4 CUNY policies. Did it move this slide?
Yes.
The policies that I implement and oversee is the CUNY policy on sexual misconduct, which includes domestic violence and intimate partner violence in terms of sexual misconduct. We have a specific policy on domestic violence and the workplace, which, you know, is obviously specific to our faculty and staff. We have the CUNY policy on campus and workplace violence, where sometimes we do see incidents of domestic violence, which can, you know, kind of fall through into workplace violence. And then we have the CUNY policy on reasonable accommodations and academic adjustment for students as well as for employees, and specifically for survivors of domestic violence, intimate partner violence. We have policies that are in place to support them in their academic as well as work environment. I also listed community resources, but I think Sherry has the full slew of community resources which are applicable to both our students as well as our faculty and staff. So I think what we will do is combine all of those resources so that we have a good set of resources available to our SPH community. So the CUNY policy on sexual misconduct specifically addresses dating violence. And Sherry has already spoken about it. This is violence committed by a person who is or has been in a social relationship of a romantic or intimate nature. Dating violence can be a single act or a pattern of behavior based on the frequency, nature, and severity of the conduct. It can include the threat of sexual assault or physical abuse. Domestic violence includes felony or misdemeanor crimes of violence committed by a current or former spouse or intimate partner of the victim, by a person with whom the victim shares a child, by a person who is cohabitating with or has cohabitated with the victim as a spouse or intimate partner, by a person similarly situated to a spouse of the victim under applicable domestic or family violence laws, or by any other person against an adult or youth victim who is protected from that person's physical abuse or violence against those applicable domestic or family violence laws. So basically we look at any kind of, my office as Title IX coordinator, I would look at any dating violence between or among students with other students, could be their partners who are maybe a student at the school or maybe an external individual. But for an external individual, our jurisdiction is fairly limited, but we would provide as much of resources as we can to that person. For domestic violence, again, it's the same thing. If it happens between people who work at the same school, we have a policy that will, and the implementation of that policy, which allows for a number of processes, which keeps our person safe. But also if it is an external individual, meaning, the spouse or the person who is at the home of this person does not necessarily work at the school, we also have certain resources that we can provide for our employee. Some of this is repetitive because, it's part of the policy. And while Sherry has already mentioned these, I would like to just go over stalking, which has become cyber stalking, and digital abuse, which has grown exponentially during COVID-19. Because we do not necessarily meet in physical conditions anymore, the chances and the number of incidents of cyber stalking, cyber abuse, digital stalking, digital abuse, using cell phones, using emails, has grown a lot. And that kind of abuse, which can then lead to domestic violence, dating violence, and as well as any other kind of sexual violence, is something that falls under the purview of these policies. Retaliation is also addressed in the policy. So if if there is a complaint and any adverse treatment of the person who's making the complaint is covered by the policy. The CUNY policy on campus and workplace violence is basically as I said before, it refers specifically to employees. But if you have a student or a student employee who is, working at the school and happens to be incidentally involved in a situation of workplace violence, the policy would cover that as well. Our public safety is always available for such complaints or any concerns or issues, questions that they may have. The workplace violence policy for the school is very detailed and is overseen by the Office of Human Resources. There is a workplace violence training that has to be taken by all employees. It's a mandatory training. And we hope that, all employees complete it so that they know exactly what the policy is and what the procedures are, as well as what the process is for handling any issues of workplace violence. The policy on domestic violence and workplace is a policy that covers any domestic violence incidents and issues that spill over into the workplace that can, kind of affect the working and the learning of our community. So for students, domestic violence is specifically relegated, it's in the Title IX policy, but we also have a domestic violence policy in the workplace, which protects our employees from any domestic violence incidents that they may be a victim of, and that may result in work-related issues that then, Human Resources Office would handle. So again, the definitions, as mentioned by Sherry, we make very sure that we know exactly what kind of issues we are dealing with. If it is an intimate partner, if it is dating violence, if it's domestic violence, and how do we define an abuser so that, when somebody comes to us with a concern or an issue or even a question, because they may not know that this is actually abuse, because it's kind of, as Sherry mentioned, it goes through a cycle of starting slow and then gathering, intensity, resulting in violence, and then that period of calm that happens. All of that, sometimes people take some time to process through that cycle. And so when there are questions and concerns, the Office of Human Resources and my office is always available to talk these issues through with students as well as employees. And of course, Sherry is available to provide any counseling help in that sense. We also maintain the list of resources for any employee or student who may just want information, may not require that, they have a actual complaint. Maybe they're asking for somebody for their family. We offer resources for everybody. The reasonable accommodations and academic adjustments are very clear in terms of people who have suffered a domestic violence incident or a sex offense or stalking. And the Title IX coordinator, which is my office, will find an acceptable accommodation based on what the situation is. For an employee, we may have to look at a workplace safety plan. For a student, there may be academic adjustments that need to be made for a victim of domestic violence, because we may need to provide some kind of flexibility in terms of submitting assignments or a different place or a different schedule of classes. We would make those kinds of adjustments through an interactive process, bringing into the conversation the specific faculty member as well as our public safety individuals. As is mentioned in the slide, reasonable accommodations may include, but are not limited to, leave of absence, modified or flexible work schedules, confidentiality of addresses and phone numbers, transfer to another location, enforcing protective orders, and providing security in and out of buildings. We have to put this in writing. So if I have a request for a reasonable accommodation, it follows a documented process. If there is a situation where I cannot grant that, then those reasons have to be outlined and the person has the right to appeal that decision. Again, in an emergency situation, we would urge our faculty, staff, and students to look at our resources page on HR, at the HR webpage, as well as on the Student Counseling, Student Services webpage. I mentioned appeals. If there is a denial of academic adjustment or a reasonable accommodation by a student, the student must file the complaint with the Office of Student Affairs. The complaint is filed in my office. If I deny it, the appeal goes to the Office of Student Affairs. For employees and applicants for jobs, if there is a denial of request for accommodation, they would file the complaint with the Office of Human Resources. Because I'm the person that provides the accommodation, if I deny it, I cannot obviously look at the appeal as well. So that is why the appeal goes to the two different offices on campus. The college dean makes the final determination if there is a denial. There are very few incidents where we would deny such an accommodation for students as well as for employees. We always make sure that we are providing as much support as possible, even to the extent of, as we mentioned earlier, changing schedules and changing, workplace locations if necessary, and providing security, maybe to the subway stop or whatever we need to do, we will do that. Certainly an order of protection is taken very seriously by public safety. It remains on file, and public safety is always on guard for those kinds of situations. With COVID-19, there has been an increased incidence in abuse, threats, violence, and students, as Sherry mentioned, who found that coming to school was a safe haven are no longer coming to the school building. They are working, they are learning from home. Employees who found respite at work, they came here 9 to 5, they felt safe, are now forced to work from home. Quarantine has decreased family and social support. They can no longer run to their friends or their family members down the block or even to the next, town, because there is, a quarantine. There is increased isolation and vulnerability. Lack of alternative housing arrangements. You can't go and stay with your mother anymore because she is in quarantine. She is an elderly person and is at risk of COVID. So those kinds of arrangements that people had earlier to be able to cope with these incidents has diminished greatly during this COVID-19. And that is why the school has, is providing as many resources as possible so that we recognize what people are facing in this time. Because, earlier on, there were some things that, the victims could do themselves, maybe handle it themselves. With COVID-19, a lot of those, the availability of those resources has definitely diminished. Medical and physical examinations are limited. You can't run to the hospital if you've been abused, if there's physical harm. You can't just run there, and people are stressed with the COVID-19 situation in hospitals. So the attention that a victim of domestic violence may have gotten because of the physical abuse is severely limited now. Again, internet and cell service and the possibility of discovery has increased because people are now at home. And so if you've had a call history that your partner, your abusive partner, can pick up on, that becomes a threat, a more threat to the person than it was before, where they could possibly keep that time to themselves when at work or at school. So support in the remote environment, as I said, the school will help students and employees with counseling, community resources, and reasonable accommodation and academic adjustment. A couple of very simple examples is a student may be provided with a reasonable accommodation of extended assignment submissions if they say that, there is a situation where it has impacted their ability to work on their assignment. The employee may be allowed time to go to the local precinct to seek an order of protection. Working with HR, who will be flexible in those situations, the school is looking at providing as much support as possible and as much information as possible so that people can remain safe in their places. The resources, as I said, I have a few resources, but I think Sherry has the full gamut of resources. I think we'll combine those to make sure that all of our resources are available to our people, to our community. And for questions, concerns, and/or specific complaints, students may reach out to Sherry Adams. Employees, faculty, and staff should reach out to Arthur and myself for any information and any issues and definitely for complaints. And I've also listed public safety because that may be the first place you reach out to if you are in an emergency situation. With that, I end my presentation and I'll stop sharing. And Arthur.
Now, I don't want to gloss over our policies, but they've already been covered in great detail. I think the underlying thread here is communication. We know what the policies are, but we can't help people unless we know. So again, this is the CUNY policy on domestic violence in the workplace, which was covered in detail previously by Sahana and Sherry. The CUNY sexual misconduct policy again. And I'm willing to share all this information with anyone who asks. I have links at the bottom of each page, which will take you directly to each policy. We have the CUNY campus and workplace violence policy, again, covered already, as well as the CUNY reasonable accommodation and academic adjustments policy. And again, it's there for the reading. It's all the same as was previously discussed. But again, in order for any of us to take action on behalf of a student or an employee, we need to know. And it's up to whoever finds out in the most confidential way as possible to share that information or to perhaps get the victim themselves to come forward. The CUNY Public Safety Department, SBH Public Safety, requires that all incidents of domestic violence be reported to their department. And again, it says should, I can't say must, but we would like all incidents that have occurred to be reported so that they can be aware and take the necessary action needed. I've included the email address for public safety there with a few bullet points. If an order of protection has been received, a copy should be given to the CUNY SBH Public Safety Department so that they are aware of the order, they know of the dates, and who the person is. All correspondence, emails, voicemails, and texts that the student or employee receives should be kept as evidence if needed. And public safety is available, again, as Sahana mentioned this, to escort all employees and students to and from modes of public transportation, or if they're parked nearby, should the person, the victim, feel threatened, and just ask. This is the CUNY SPH reporting procedure. It is on the public safety homepage. Faculty, staff, students, and guests are encouraged to promptly report any past crime, attempted crime, or criminal activity in progress that occurs on campus or on the adjacent geographic perimeter of the campus to the Public Safety Department. Public Safety will expeditiously respond to the condition reported and make necessary notifications to the local police precinct. Criminal activities as well as other emergencies can be reported by 1, calling public safety, the phone number is provided, emailing public safety, reporting the information to the officer at the 7th floor Public Safety Department reception desk, and lastly, if the situation you observe or are involved in is of an extreme or life-threatening nature, you should always call 911 immediately. The police will respond, and public safety, their number is there. But again, if it's an emergency, I can't stress enough to call 911 initially. Domestic violence and the COVID pandemic. As the COVID pandemic pushes workforces to stay home under lockdown, employees who are working remotely are increasingly at risk for abuse, especially from intimate partners quarantined with them. The reasons: stress, isolation, economic anxiety and joblessness, alcohol, and lack of resources. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, instances of IPV were already extremely high. Unfortunately, one of the most striking findings to come out of research on IPV in the wake of disasters is that, in addition to the rate of abuse increasing, the severity of abuse can increase as well. With gun sales surging, many researchers are concerned that we will see an uptick in domestic homicides when the dust finally settles. And as quoted by James Coward, the president for Factor One, a threat assessment and management organization, when you designate a workplace, that becomes something the organization is required to take into consideration for the health and safety of the individual. If I allow an employee to work from home 1 or 2 days a week with flex scheduling, or in the case of the pandemic, I'm assigning them to work from home, that becomes their designated workplace. The minute that becomes their designated workplace, all safety provisions come into play. That's always been true, but in the case of domestic violence, if we're assigning them to work from home, we're in essence responsible for their safety to a certain degree when they're at home, and that includes safety from their own spouse during work time. Employees need to know that they will not be penalized for seeking help and should receive information on how to recognize the signs of a troublesome or abusive relationship and know where to turn for assistance for themselves or for their coworkers. Lastly, I've included some contacts as well, and we can merge all of these together. Where to go, who to contact for help. Again, if you're experiencing an emergency, please call 911 immediately.
Thank you, Arthur and Sahana. And I will stop recording the presentation. Thank you, everyone who's taken the time to watch the presentation.